The first reports came as fractured signals across the galactic relay network, fragments of military telemetry bleeding into civilian news feeds before official channels could sanitize a message. An object of staggering mass and velocity had struck Luna, Earth's sole natural satellite, splitting its crust along fault lines, igniting plumes of vaporized regolith, and sending tidal shock waves through its interior until a whole body tore apart. The moon was gone, replaced by a tumbling field of incandescent debris. For most species, the act would have been a symbolic gesture, a crippling but non-lethal blow meant to humiliate or disorient. To the observer stationed in the neutral periphery of Sol, the loss was interpreted in exactly those terms. They drafted the first briefings in careful, detached language. Humanity is expected to experience ecological disruption, navigational hazards, and potential geopolitical instability. Likely response will involve defensive withdrawal, planetary lockdown, and attempts at reparative negotiation. There was no note of fear in their voices, only the quiet certainty of precedent. Civilizations in shock rarely marched forward. They staggered back. The debris still glowed when the first contradiction emerged. Orbital sensors logged not panic, but acceleration. Ships abandoning stationary orbits not in retreat, but in coordinated dispersal. Industrial yards went from idle shift patterns to continuous output in less than a day. Cargo tugs stopped hauling consumer freight and began pulling sealed containers toward military docks. Power grids surged under manufacturing loads. Communications traffic spiked, encrypted at layers the observation arrays could not penetrate. Earth did not appear to be collapsing. It appeared to be mobilizing. The Planetary Emergency Council made a single broadcast to the galaxy. The feed carried no images, only a voice, calm, precise, and without tremor. It listed the environmental adjustments already underway to counter the tidal collapse. Oceanic barrier walls initiated, climate modulation satellites recalibrated, evacuation protocols for low-lying coastal zones executed without delay. Then the voice shifted tone by a fraction, as if lowering the ambient temperature of a message. It declared that the strike on Luna was not an act of war. It was an act of eradication and would be answered in kind. The closing phrase was in an Earth language most observers could not translate. Those who did provided the literal meaning. Night falls for you before it does for us. The lead analyst aboard the primary neutral observation vessel filed her report with skepticism. Her model still predicted that Earth's rapid response was a temporary adrenaline spike, bound to burn out when logistical constraints caught up. She noted that without a moon, Earth's axial stability would degrade over decades, perhaps centuries, but that immediate climate variation would complicate food supply and naval operations. She concluded that humanity's operational window for effective retaliation was measured in weeks, after which internal instability would force them to sue for peace. Her words were clinical, her conclusions neat. What she did not account for was a human ability to treat every second inside that window as a blade's edge. In human command networks, there was no mourning period. The destruction of Luna was acknowledged once in a moment of collective silence, and then operational planning took over. Climate engineers began simulations for constructing orbital stabilizers using captured asteroids. Spacefaring construction crews, some drawn from civilian mining companies, were reassigned under military authority. Shipyards tripled output rates by abandoning non-essential safety protocols. Volunteers flooded enlistment centers, many bringing skills in navigation, engineering, or cyber warfare. The mood was not despair. It was concentration sharpened to the point of cruelty. When alien diplomatic envoys, sympathetic to the unknown attackers, sent offers to mediate, they received no official acknowledgement. The only reply was a shift in human fleet trajectories. Deep-range reconnaissance tracked dozens of task groups breaking from Sol's orbital defense ring and burning hard from multiple vectors. The dispersion was so wide that analysts argued over whether they were fleeing or surrounding. The truth was neither. They were positioning. Aboard the observation flagship, the junior linguist intercepted fragmented human transmissions. Most were indecipherable, but certain repeated terms stood out. Project, tide shift, nightfall protocol. The phrases carried no obvious technical definition, but their recurrence suggested operational code names. When asked to speculate, The linguist could only admit uncertainty. Humans name things for effect as much as for accuracy. It could be a defensive countermeasure or the blueprint for something catastrophic. On Earth, civilian factories began producing not only weapons but vast quantities of prefabricated structural plating, heavy orbital scaffolds, and propulsion arrays. The scale exceeded any plausible defensive purpose. Astronomical observatories in alien space picked up metallic glints among the moon's debris field. Humans were harvesting their own planetary shrapnel. The material was ferried to shipyards in convoy patterns more disciplined than any commercial route. Within a week, human fleet coordination reached a tempo alien observers found unnerving. Ships appeared where no safe jump lanes existed, suggesting navigational risks no rational species would take in wartime. Supply lines ran lean to the point of collapse, yet crews kept operating. The observation fleet commander logged a private note that would never be entered into the official record. They are not operating for survival. They are operating for precedent. As Luna's shadow remains continued their orbit, forming a bright, jagged halo around the planet, the humans began to repurpose its fragments into more than memorials. Some pieces were smelted down into weapon hulls, others into satellites. Rumors circulated among alien analysts that certain chunks were being fitted with propulsion systems of their own, though no confirmation existed. What was certain was the expression worn by human crews during refit operations. The observers couldn't name it, but they knew enough to recognize that it wasn't grief. It was preparation. By the second week, humanity's unified planetary war state was in full effect. The transition had been frictionless, as if the machinery for such mobilization had been in place for years, waiting for a trigger. Alien strategists, studying the change, were forced to discard the theory that humans were reacting impulsively. This was systemic. The moon's destruction had not paralyzed them. It had activated something woven into the species' cultural spine. From the vantage of the observation fleet, the most unsettling detail wasn't the number of ships leaving Earth, but the rate of their construction. Raw materials were arriving faster than the shipyards could process, yet nothing sat idle. Every frame was fitted, armed, and crewed within days. Many crews included civilians with no prior combat record, yet simulation data suggested they were being trained in high-efficiency modules en route to their assignments. There was no downtime, no margin for hesitation. On the 15th day after Luna's obliteration, an observation drone caught an image of a human assault carrier departing Sol orbit. The enemy coalition expected the first human counterattack to be measured and cautious, perhaps a few symbolic strikes against lightly defended assets to restore morale. Instead, human fleets ignored the obvious targets entirely, bypassed fortified sectors, and appeared deep inside hostile territory within days of departure. The assaults were swift and precise, hitting logistics depots, communications arrays, and supply convoys before vanishing back into uncharted routes. No pattern could be predicted, no sector considered safe. Alien analysts labeled the operation suicidal, yet the casualty reports told a different story. Losses were minimal, gains decisive. Civilian news across the galaxy struggled to frame the events in a coherent narrative. Alien commentators describe humanity's behavior as emotional and impulsive, born of grief over Luna. Sociologists appeared on broadcast channels to lecture on the psychological instability of Deathworld species, citing outdated studies to explain the reckless nature of the strikes. None realized that the chaos was deliberate. The randomness was an illusion. Every hit was chosen to collapse the enemy's logistical spine. Captured prisoners were returned alive but shaken, speaking in hushed tones about boarding assaults where human soldiers advanced to the rhythm of some alien observers called war music. The name Project Tideshift entered public speculation when a decrypted burst transmission confirmed its operational phase. It referred not to a defensive measure, but to a new class of weaponry, mobile gravitic projectors designed to destabilize the orbits of moons and asteroids. The first demonstration came in a remote star system where the enemy maintained a hidden supply base. Human ships deployed the devices in a synchronized array, pulling a local moon just enough off balance to send it into a decaying spiral. Within weeks, the moon fragmented and its debris showered the planet below. Casualties were minimal by design, but the message could not have been clearer. What you can do to us, we can do to you, faster, cleaner, and without hesitation. Panic spread across enemy civilian worlds. Rumors exaggerated the capabilities of the new weapons, claiming humanity could collapse entire planetary rings or drag comets into orbital paths. Refugees began fleeing from border systems long before human fleets arrived, overwhelming nearby sectors. Military planners found themselves pulled between defending core assets and containing domestic unrest. Observation fleet intelligence noted that humanity was achieving strategic objectives without needing to fight large-scale fleet engagements. Fear was proving more efficient than firepower. Enemy diplomats attempted renewed contact, framing their offers as mutual de-escalation. The response was silence, followed by new strikes against fuel refineries and deep space dry docks. The lack of negotiation was not stubbornness. It was policy. Humanity was not seeking settlement. They were shaping the terms of the galaxy's future. Even among the enemy's allies, murmurs of doubt began to grow. Some worlds questioned whether their own moons could survive a protracted war. The phrase Deathworld diplomacy began trending in alien networks. It was used first as a warning, then as reluctant respect. The principle was simple: never attack a Deathworld species unless you are prepared for a total, generational retaliation. Humanity was turning that principle into a doctrine, and every broadcast from Sol reinforced it. The observation fleet's commander sent a private note to his government describing a shift in human operational philosophy. Initially assumed to be fighting for survival, they were instead fighting for deterrence, making the cost of aggression so catastrophic that no rational species would ever repeat the offense. This was not vengeance for Luna alone. It was a demonstration meant for the entire galaxy. 3 simultaneous attacks marked the turning point. In separate sectors, human strike groups dismantled shipyards critical to the enemy's fleet replacement program. The assaults lasted less than 30 minutes from initial contact to withdrawal, leaving nothing but slag and drifting wreckage. For the first time, enemy high command convened under full emergency status, admitting that the war was no longer winnable in conventional terms. They still underestimated the humans by assuming this would be the moment to open negotiations. It wasn't. Intelligence officers monitoring Sol detected a massive shift in resource allocation. Orbital stations that had been producing standard warship components began manufacturing structural elements too large for conventional craft. The partially assembled frames took shape in low Earth orbit, visible to any telescope, their scale dwarfing even the largest human carriers. The purpose was not publicly stated, but the construction continued day and night, drawing on materials harvested from Luna's wreckage. Inside the observation fleet, analysts debated whether the humans were building a defensive superstation, a propaganda monument, or something else entirely. The lack of leaks was telling. Humanity had been broadcasting their fury openly when it suited them, yet now they kept their silence. Whatever this project was, it was meant to be revealed on their terms, and only once. The commander wrote in his final entry for the quarter that the most disturbing aspect of the campaign was the absence of overreach. Every action taken by humanity seemed aggressive to the point of madness, yet each blow served precise, calculated purpose. No resources were wasted, no strike lacked a secondary effect, and no gesture was purely symbolic. The attacks on the shipyards had crippled enemy production, the destabilization of moons had shattered civilian morale, and the unrelenting silence in response to diplomatic outreach had fostered paranoia at every level. From a bridge of the observation flagship, Earth was a distant blue and white marble ring by industry. The fragments of its shattered moon now served as both raw material and a constant reminder to anyone watching. Even at this distance, one could see that the war machine being built there was not slowing. It was accelerating. The enemy coalition's war councils began shifting from victory planning to survival planning, though few were willing to admit aloud. In his closing note to Allied observers, the commander included a single line that was not intended for public release. If this is what they do when they lose a moon, we must consider what they would do if they lost a planet. The massive orbital structure took form in silence, its skeleton of interlocking frames growing outward until it resembled a spearhead aimed at the stars. The observation fleets watching from afar had no designation for it, no confirmed schematics, and no comprehension of its intended reach. What they did understand was that it was being assembled with parts of Luna itself. Material once part of the moon now reforged into a weapon. The choice was intentional, and every alien strategist knew it. When the first scans revealed banks of magnetic acceleration rails lining the weapon's spine, even the most skeptical analysts recognized the purpose. It was not a defensive station. It was a launch platform for kinetic projectiles on a scale never before attempted by any known species. Such a device could take an asteroid, accelerate it to a significant fraction of light speed, and deliver it anywhere within range with planetary killing force. The enemy coalition, already fractured by defeats and psychological strain, understood the implication. If they did not stop humanity now, they would live under the shadow of that platform forever. Peace offers came in rapid succession, each more desperate than the last. Full withdrawal from contested sectors, reparations for damages, non-aggression pacts. Every proposal was met with the same unbroken silence. Humanity was still moving fleets, still raiding targets, and still stripping Luna's remains to feed the construction effort. It was not a negotiation tactic. It was a refusal to even acknowledge the legitimacy of a bargaining table. When the weapon was completed, its activation sequence began without public announcement. Deep space telescopes caught the ignition of its acceleration rays, glowing like a chain of white suns. Somewhere in a distant system, an asteroid of irregular shape and dense composition began to move, pulled in a trajectory by a fleet of tugs. The enemy coalition scrambled ships to intercept, but the object's mass and velocity made interception impossible. Humanity had chosen their target with meticulous cruelty. Not an enemy core world, but the home world of one of the coalition's most vocal supporters, a planet that had celebrated Luna's destruction. The asteroid did not strike head-on. Instead, it skimmed the upper atmosphere at a calculated angle, shedding fragments the size of cities. The kinetic shock generated planetary-scale tsunamis, superstorms, and seismic upheavals. Billions were displaced, but the planet was left intact enough to survive. It was a demonstration, not extermination. Embedded in the asteroid's fractured surface was a transmission device broadcasting a single sentence in multiple galactic languages. "We could have ended you." The coalition's internal cohesion shattered. Worlds that had once pledged fleets and resources to the war effort now demanded immediate disengagement. Military leaders who had argued for escalation were stripped of command. Civilian populations rioted in fear of becoming the next example. The cost of continuing the war had shifted from strategic disadvantage to existential risk. The formal apology came 3 days later, broadcast across every known communications channel. The enemy's leaders appeared on a joint transmission, acknowledging responsibility for Luna's destruction, condemning the act as unjustifiable, and offering unconditional surrender alongside reparations. Humanity accepted without ceremony. Fleets began returning to Sol, but the kinetic platform remained in orbit, its silhouette a constant reminder. In the aftermath, analysts from neutral powers attempted to chart the strategic pattern of the campaign. The conclusion was unanimous. Humanity had never intended a war of occupation or conquest. The entire retaliation had been designed as a deterrent, to make the destruction of Luna a singular event in galactic history. The war had ended not with the annihilation of the enemy, but with the annihilation of the idea that humanity could be struck without consequence. For the observation fleet's commander, the final report was the most difficult he had ever filed. He described a species that responded to existential assault not by collapsing, but by accelerating to a level of mobilization and ingenuity no other known civilization could match. They had fought not to reclaim what was lost, but to ensure that the loss became a warning etched into the galaxy's memory. He closed with a sentence he hoped his superiors would take seriously. They did not rebuild the moon because they did not need to. They built fear instead, and it will outlast stone. Months later, in the quiet corridors of a human orbital station, a child looked up at a soldier assigned to the platform's defense. She asked if they would ever replace the moon. The soldier answered without hesitation. "No, we'll build something better. Something they'll see every time they look our way." Beyond the station's windows, Luna's remains still circled the Earth, not as a wound but as a crown of jagged silver, each fragment a reminder that humanity's rage was not a fire to be extinguished. It was a star to be avoided.